Good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And for the 2000th time, we welcome you to our program here today. And look, I promise I'm not going to beat you over the head with this. I promise we're not going to, necessarily do too much as it relates to all that. But I got to tell you, I am really excited about this. And I was talking to my wife about this a little bit last night. That it feels fun to have done something for as long as we've been able to do it. I'm just thankful I haven't gotten fired over the course of the last however many years it is, going back to August of 2015 when we started all of this. So I am thrilled about it. I am really proud of it. I'm looking forward to what we hope are thousands and thousands and thousands more episodes of this show. We're going to have some fun today. And I think it's actually kind of interesting, maybe even ironic, the subject matter that we're going to talk about on today's show, because I think in a lot of ways, it sort of explains why we even have DawgNation Daily to begin with. There's a certain perspective that we're able to share on a show like this that is just needed, because if you were dependent upon the national media to talk correctly about Georgia football, I think most Georgia fans would just sort of feel lacking. And so I think we have evidence of that today, of maybe why a show like DawgNation Daily was important to start all these years ago, and why we still kind of hang around and thrive after all of these years of doing this. So we'll have some fun with that. Connor Riley stops by. We'll obviously take care of all the business as it relates to Georgia football. I have noticed what I feel like is a little bit of a vibe shift about something pretty important related to Georgia as our season gets ready to begin and practice gets ready to begin this week. I'll tell you what I have noticed. You can tell me if you agree with that coming up here. And by the way, a former Georgia coach is very much in the news here today for something interesting that he said. We'll talk about that before we're all said and done there as well. So let's get ready to roll through it here. Fun times today, episode number 2000, DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
Today we celebrate episode number 2000 of our show. What a feeling and what an accomplishment all of that is. By the way, if you're watching on video, you see not only the nice congratulations on 2000 episodes sign there on the front of our desk, nice brand new graphic. Casey, our great DawgNation social media extraordinaire, and so many other things around here. She kind of gave me the gift of some new graphics for our 2000s episode, which I'm really excited about. And obviously, we're going to have some fun with that over the course of our time here today, and probably a little bit in the days to come here a little bit too, because somebody's actually kind of made me aware of another milestone that we might be hitting at just the right time. We'll tell you more about that coming up in the days ahead. Let me instead kind of do this as a way of starting our show today. In some respects, it's kind of ironic that today is our 2000th episode, because I think we get another example today of why a show like this even exists in the first place. I don't want to be too self-serving here, but I do want to kind of explain this. So years ago, my idea for DawgNation Daily was a couple of things. Idea number one, there wasn't enough college football content in general, that if you tuned into, like, say, sports radio or sports on television, the kind of predominant media entities that kind of discussed sports back then, there just never was enough college football, even though college football, I think, has been the second most popular sport in America for as long as I've been alive. The NFL, obviously, the reigning king of sports in America. College football, we think, right behind that in terms of overall popularity. But if you tuned into a television show or if you tuned into the radio, oftentimes they were talking about things other than college football. You and I, we are college football obsessives. I created this show for us because, hey, there's just not enough of that. We want to provide that. We think there's a market for that even during the non-college football season. You hear more people kind of talking that way now, but when we first started doing this in 2015, that was a little bit of a new idea. The fact that 52 weeks a year, 5 days a week, there would be enough interest in college football no matter what point in time you were in the calendar to discuss college football. That, we believed, was especially true here in the state of Georgia, where the Dogs are just the most popular sports entity. And sometimes if you tuned in to kind of the sort of reigning kings of media, whether it be, whatever format you're thinking about, you'd be left to conclude, do these people not realize how popular Georgia football is? Because right now they're talking about something else, or they may be writing about something else, or they may be, focusing on something else. when really what fans in Georgia want to hear about is Georgia football and Georgia doing battle with its SEC rivals. And we sort of felt like there was not just a hole in the market, but a market in the hole, which was the opportunity to kind of create a business around people who just wanted Georgia football conversation each and every day. And in doing that, I think we've provided the opportunity talk about Georgia football the way that it should be discussed. Because if you left this to the Kirk Herbstreits, the Reese Davises, or the whoever else, and listen, I don't generally speaking have much of a beef with any of those type of guys. But if you left the Georgia football conversation to people who are several hundred miles from the epicenter of Dog Nation here in the state of Georgia, then you're going to get a conversation that doesn't share and reflect the full perspective of Georgia fans. So I'm not telling you I'm the smartest person in the world or that my opinion matters more than anyone else's does. But what I've tried to do for a living here is listen very closely to the kind of conversation that Georgia fans are having and do a show that reflects the prevailing narrative of UGA fans. There's a reason each and every day we say the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I don't just say that so you'll know that. I say that out loud each and every day so that I'll hear that myself. And I'll be reminded of what this show exists to provide, which is a conversation that reflects the way that fans feel at any given moment, not the way the other media feels or the way that, the coaches want to talk or whatever else. This is a conversation that reflects the overall feeling of the fans. And a day like today is another reminder of just exactly why that conversation, I believe, is needed. And the fact that it's been needed has allowed us to kind of live and exist and thrive for as long as we have, because y'all know what we've been talking about going back, the last, few months here. We had this yesterday, right? It's like Marvin Harrison Jr., who, ought to be, he is a great player and ought to be a great example of what college football is all about. But unfortunately, he has spent too much time, it would seem, with his whiny head coach Ryan Day. And so now Marvin Harrison Jr., this great sort of alpha wide receiver who I think is going to go on to make $100 million or more in the NFL, all of a sudden now he's no better than Ryan Day in terms of the overall whining about, well, if I hadn't gotten hurt, if Javon Bullard hadn't hit me so hard, then I stayed in the game and we could have won the game, woulda, coulda, shoulda, blah, 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 blah. We talked about that yesterday. We've talked about, Kirk Herbstreit this offseason and Herbstreit's love affair with Alabama as if this was still 2015 or something like that. Saying, just when you count out Nick Saban, that's when Alabama's at its most dangerous. Herbstreit said that same nonsense a year ago, was proven wrong then, and thinks he can sort of re-rack the same old tired argument, and nobody's going to notice that he's been selling this nonsense now for, going on 2 years, and it hasn't been right yet. And then you've got guys like Reese Davis, the host of ESPN's College Game Day, who has touted mighty Michigan as his number one overall team. And we've said over and over again, we actually don't care about somebody picking someone other than Georgia to win a game or win a national championship or whatever else, that there's nothing wrong with having an opinion. But the degree to which opinions seem to go against Georgia, both after its first national championship in 2021 and its most recent national championship in 2022, we've just sort of said that doesn't necessarily reflect the narrative the way that it should be, which is last year, not only did Georgia win the national championship, it actually won the thing pretty darn easily, right? Some of us have been around the block a few times here. How many teams have you ever seen win a national championship easier than Georgia did a year ago? And I think Georgia fans who've been kind of waiting for a long time to sort of be on top of the college football world, I think what they'd say is, hey, our team's actually kind of accomplishing in a pretty, significant way right now. Our team's actually doing some really good things here right now. It'd be nice to have this acknowledged. I've used the line before that, Roman Reigns makes famous in the WWE. Acknowledge me. Reigns may be a tech guy, but overall, that's still a pretty good perspective, I think, for Georgia fans to have of, hey, you can talk about Michigan if you want to. You can talk about Ohio State if you want to. You can talk about Alabama if you want to. But before you do that, acknowledge me. If you want to make the case for someone else winning the national championship, you better be ready to explain why Georgia's not going to win the national championship first, because Georgia's won the last two. The onus is on you to make the case against Georgia if you want to make the case for somebody else. And that's why shows like this exist, to sort of bring a little bit more, I guess, of a rational perspective into what sometimes can be a somewhat irrational conversation around college football. But as Georgia fans do this kind of thing, it actually gives Georgia a little bit of a bad mark with some media types. Now, we don't care about that necessarily, but once again, it's sort of an example of why Georgia fans have to have their place to congregate, have to have their opportunity to do their, have their shows and their discussions and things like that, because you can't trust the national media to do this for you. You just simply can't. I'll give you an example. Tom Fornelli is a writer for CBSSports.com. Now, listen, I don't have any beef with Fornelli. If anything, I guess I like him more so than not. I certainly, have consumed a lot of his content over the years. So this is not like anti-Tom Fornelli to the extent that that's even a kind of thing that someone would even feel compelled to do whatsoever. But I think Fornelli, in the clip I'm about to play for you, does sort of reflect what I do think that some Georgia fans find pretty irritating here right now. All the evidence that I just cited of all the people who seem to once again be wanting to make a case for somebody other than Georgia here this year, I don't think you can fault Georgia fans for noticing that. I don't think you can fault Georgia fans for just sort of paying attention. And what's the Mark Cuban gif where you kind of write the thing down? I don't think you can fault Georgia fans for just kind of taking notes every now and then when somebody sort of makes their case against Georgia here this year. But if you notice that too much, all of a sudden the media wants to gripe back at you, and Tom Fornelli on the Cover 3 podcast kind of gave an example of that. Now, I shortened this clip, the beginning of it. He said some nice things about Georgia, but the part that matters is apparently he's grown tired of Georgia fans, grown frustrated with Georgia fans. All of a sudden now he wants to criticize Georgia fans for the fact that Georgia fans have dared to notice some of the nonsense that's been said about other college teams thus far this offseason, whether it be Marvin Harrison and Ryan Day's whining, Jim Harbaugh's boasting, by the way, more on that in a moment, the ESPN Game Day hosts lining up beside somebody else other than Georgia, firing the one Georgia guy they had on their set. Georgia fans have just taken notice of this, and apparently the way in which they've noticed has drawn the ire of at least one national media tie. This is what Tom Fornelli apparently said about Georgia fans this week. Take a listen to this.
They're kind of devolving into nuts, and it's kind of like you see it when programs get really big and fan base is kind of, they're all confident and you're winning titles. Like the better the program gets, the thinner the skin gets of fans of that program, and they can't accept any kind of slight or criticism where it's like, oh, you hate us, blah, blah, blah. And I'm seeing that so much from Georgia fans this offseason. And I think it all stems from Kirby telling the team, hey, nobody believes in you, blah, 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 which is fine to tell your players because you need that kind of motivation to get through a season when you have the expectations they do and it's tough. But the fans, you don't have to buy into it. Nobody thinks you stink. Nobody thinks you're not going to make the playoff. Nobody thinks you aren't the favorite to win the national title. Everybody understands you will be in the national title or in the playoff.
So that quote right there is why DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, exists. That quote right there is why we've lasted 2,000 episodes. It is. And I don't hate Tom Fornelli. In fact, I don't even dislike Tom Fornelli. But that quote is why DawgNation Daily has existed for as long as it has and probably will exist for as long as we hope that it does. Because the idea of confronting that kind of stuff is not going to go out of style anytime soon. It's just not. It's just not. The fact that Georgia fans have dared to notice what has been said about either Georgia or other college football teams so far this offseason can now be categorized by some as sort of devolving into being nuts, into being crazy. Georgia fans, you're crazy because you've got too thin skin. Fornelli at the end of that quote says, nobody thinks you're not going to be in the college football playoff. Nobody thinks you're not going to be a part of the national championship conversation. I guess that may be true, except for the two most prominent people in the entire sport. Reese Davis, the host of ESPN's College Game Day. Kirk Herbstreit, the loudest single voice in the entire sport, the most prominent analyst overall. We've already got them on the record going in the direction of a Michigan or an Alabama. And a year ago, by the way, when Georgia was the reigning national champion, coming back into the 2022 season, when Georgia won the national championship with ease, yet at the beginning of the year, I mean, literally speaking, nobody picked them to win it. They were preseason number 3, and what we said at the time was, if you want to make the case for Alabama, you can do so. You want to make the case for Ohio State, you can do so. But the idea that it's unanimous at the beginning of the 2022 season that nobody thought Georgia could win the national championship, that in itself kind of worked out to be a slight. Now, the truth is that Nolan Smith doesn't help our argument and our cause on this because he did sort of, I guess, exaggerate some of this kind of stuff. But just because Nolan exaggerated, it doesn't mean that there wasn't some real stuff that got Georgia fans' real attention, and doesn't mean that some of that stuff doesn't linger in here before the start of the 2023 season. Now, the other thing that Tom Fornelli kind of points out, which is, I think, part of this there too, is Kirby Smart doesn't play this game, right? It's like Kirby Smart does not get into war of words. It's like you see, certain coaches are kind of going back and forth with each other, like the stuff that Sean Payton, the new Broncos coach, said, and he kind of fired off at the Jets, and the Jets are firing back. Like, this is these are professional men kind of going back and forth, like this. Kirby Smart doesn't play that game. So when it comes to like defending Georgia or making the case for Georgia, all the more reason for shows like this to exist, because Kirby Smart's too busy to do that. Kirby Smart, does his talking with his helmets. He said that, many times over and over and over again. He's not going to do that. So once again, we're sort of left as fans to do this for ourselves, because the Georgia team is a lot more professional, a lot more buttoned up, and that they're just not going to do that. But once again here, to kind of accentuate why stuff like this, I guess, is so ridiculous in the eyes of so many Georgia fans, that Georgia fans will be the ones getting criticized for the stuff they've happened to notice here this offseason. Like, we have an example this week about how crazy the narrative about Georgia has been, how much it's been pushed by actually very prominent figures inside the sport, media types around the sport, and Georgia fans, I don't think, should have to apologize for what they have noticed other people having said. There was a story at DawgNation.com yesterday. I know our producer, Michael Carvel, also had talked about this a lot over the weekend, too. He had kind of, shared some of this with me. So Jim Harbaugh is quoted in a Bruce Feldman story in The Athletic. And, like if you're a Georgia fan, how else are you supposed to take this other than a slight? Like, what else would you do with this other than take it as a slight? I want to show you the quote here. Feldman wrote the story. Now, Feldman, apparently, he must really have a lot of access to the Michigan program, because he's already been touting them a lot already. But at DawgNation.com, so I'm going to read this. This is Connor Riley's story about Bruce Feldman and Jim Harbaugh, their little exchange here. So Connor writes, in speaking, and by the way, Connor will join us here in a moment. In speaking with the Athletic's Bruce Feldman, Harbaugh made it clear how talented he thinks this Michigan team can be. He told Feldman he believes Michigan won't just break Georgia's record of 15 players taken in a single NFL draft, but are going to shatter it. The quote here is, I think we're going to have 20 guys picked in the next NFL draft. I bet we break that draft record. Georgia had 15 that year. So if you're a Georgia fan and you're like, who is Jim Harbaugh to say this kind of stuff about Georgia? Apparently, just for noticing that, the Tom Fornellis of the world think that makes you nuts. Well, there you go. That's all you need to know right there. This is the atmosphere and the climate that currently exists around college football, where everybody under the sun, the Bruce Feldmans, the Reese Davises, the Kirk Herbstreits, the on and on you go, everybody in the world seems to want to clout chase right now by making a pick of something other than Georgia, because it's boring to pick the team that's won 2 years in a row. And it's Georgia fans who are crazy because they happen to notice that. Well, guess what? I don't think Georgia fans are thin-skinned about this. I don't think Georgia fans are, necessarily, mad about this. What I think Georgia fans are doing is they are simply taking receipts. This is what they did before the game against Tennessee last November, when you had anonymous coaches telling ESPN that Georgia was going to give up 50 and no one was going to be able to beat Tennessee and all that stuff there. The entire game day crowd, for the most part, picked Tennessee to win that game. All Georgia fans did was they kept the receipts. And, yeah, fans were intense inside the stadium that day. The team itself fed off that, and they marched towards a go for 2 in 22 national championship season was on. That's what this is all over again. It's simply a matter of, if you're going to talk up Michigan, Georgia fans are going to notice. If Michigan and Jim Harbaugh is going to talk up itself, Georgia fans are going to notice. If Ohio State spends an entire year whining for having lost to Georgia, the same way Alabama had spent the entire year before that whining because they lost to Georgia, Georgia fans are going to notice. And they are not going to apologize for noticing. And when Georgia goes for 3 in 23, something we believe they're going to do, Georgia fans are going to bring this back up. Right now, Georgia is the kings of college football. And Georgia fans get to decide what kind of benevolent dictatorship they want to run, how gracious, how generous they want to be. And if Georgia wants all the spoils that come its way from victory, that's the choice. And right now, some fans are saying, I don't quite think the media is talking about my team the way they probably should. And so with the dogs on the field, we're going to give them one more chance to get it right, and we'll see if the media is actually capable of doing that. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and coming to you here for the 2000th time. And we are glad to have you with us for the program today. When we first started, it was just podcasts, because that's basically all there was. This is kind of like, it's weird to think how much the media, social media and actual media has kind of changed since August of 2015 when we first kicked this thing off. Back then, the streaming video stuff just wasn't really a thing very much, but we were out there doing a podcast. Now it's Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and Twitch. I still don't know how we get on all those platforms. I still don't believe I could even find Twitch. But you know what? We're there. I'm thankful, and I'm glad that we're able to do this for you each and every day Our radio partners have always been so good to us as well on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. I know how to find them. And then, of course, podcast. Now it's Apple, Spotify, and a million other ways there as well. It's just really cool to watch the way in which not just the show has grown over the years, but the way in which the platforms which the show is made available, that's grown there too, because we just want to meet people where they are and kind of do all of that. And so we're really excited to be able to do that. We appreciate our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible there as well. Truly, truly, truly. The relationship we have with so many great sponsors is the way in which we're able to do all of this, because I couldn't have done this on my own. We first started the show, way back then, it was kind of designed to be one of those things I could just do on my own, right? I wasn't recording it live. I could, kind of add all the bells and whistles that I wanted and kind of take some time to kind of, publish it and, get it all ready to go. Back then, that's kind of what it was. Well, now it's kind of grown to the point where I don't really know how to do the video stuff, and I don't really, obviously the studio, the lights and the cameras and the microphones, things like that. It's sort of grown into something that's so far beyond, my, ability to be able to control it. It takes an entire crew of folks. We got both Michael Carvel and Kaylee Manziel here today. You got, Casey working on some great graphic stuff for us. Todd, who, makes sure the show shows up on the website and all that kind of stuff, which I would never be able to do. So we could not do this without a team of folks, and we couldn't have a team of folks working on this without a great sponsor who makes this all possible, like our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. So I sincerely thank those of you who have shown support to them for the support they've shown to us, because honestly, that's kept us in business. It's, I've got 2 kids, I've got a wife. It's allowed me to support my family, and I am so thankful to that. So if you're a homeowner and you see like those signs of water issues, or water intrusion, or if you see the foundation issues, it's time to reach out and give my friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia a call. And the signs of this. You've been hearing me talk about it for years. When it rains, if you see water inside the house, you need to get that fixed. You need to get that seen about. In the garage, crawl space, certainly down in the basement. Sometimes that stuff just sort of gets in. You don't even know how it got in. It's just there. A little puddle shows up. Well, over the course of time, enough water can do an incredible amount of damage. You already know that. So reach out, get it seen about. The same thing for those cracks in the walls. Sometimes they show up like horizontal cracks in the sheetrock. Sometimes it's like the stair step stuff you see in the brick. Sometimes it's just the way in which a door doesn't quite close the way that it's supposed to. Or, there's all kinds of things like that. They're just something might be going on here. Well, the best way to get peace of mind is to reach out to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And listen, they are a solutions-based company. That means they're interested in creating a solution to your problem. And oftentimes, the problems are actually relatively small. It's your home, so you make it big in your mind, but the actual truth is it could be smaller. And if it is, ESOG is happy to give you a simple fix for your relatively small problem. But if it's a more substantial issue, all the more reason to have ESOG on the job, because they've got an entire team of engineers on staff to do great work for you. That is what they are all about. So I want you to give them a call, 678-ESOG now. 678-ESOG now. And here's the cool thing. Not only is Engineered Solutions of Georgia a longtime friend of ours and a great supporter of DawgNation Daily, but they're also proud partners of UGA as well. That means when you support Engineered Solutions of Georgia, you're also supporting a company that supports the dogs. And let me tell you, there's a great feeling associated with all that there too. So check out our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia today. We will do all of that. And glad to have them with us here today. All right, so we are going to roll on here in a moment. We'll talk to Connor Riley. That's going to be a good time. We'll be glad to have Connor as a part of our show here today, and a great guest for our 2000th episode. We'll talk to him about some of the stuff I mentioned there before. Georgia fans kind of under the microscope here a little bit for some of the things they've noticed thus far this offseason, the start of Georgia practice coming up here this week, all kinds of fun things going down on all of that. So make sure you join us, and we'll be a part of that here in a moment. For now, though, let's get ready to go around the DawgHouse here today. And obviously, as I said before, Georgia practice gets ready to get going here this week. And I have kind of noticed what I think is a little bit of a vibe shift around one of the most important topics for Georgia ahead of the upcoming fall camp, which begins this week. Georgia obviously begins the season, at the end of the month. And I feel like that one of the things we know we're going to be talking about is what's going down at the quarterback spot. And I've kind of given you some, I think, candid remarks before about kind of how I've seen the quarterback position sort of evolve in my mind. I think when you kind of, realize the Stetson Bennett's career was going to come to an end after last January, and Georgia will be looking for a new quarterback for the 2023 season, my initial thought was this is a quarterback race that I expected to be wide open. I expected Brock Vandagriff to make a big push for the job. I expected Gunnar Stockton to make a big push for the job. I expected Carson Beck to, maybe begin first snap of the first practice as the lead guy. But I really was of the belief that a Stockton or a Vandagriff would have a chance to win the starting job just as much as Carson did, that his experience maybe gave him an edge in the case of Carson, but it would not necessarily be the deciding factor. That's kind of the belief that I sort of had about Georgia at the quarterback position. Well, during spring, the scenario kind of played out, at least in my eyes, in my mind, a little bit different than I thought that it would. I thought that Carson Beck looked really mature. I was really impressed with his performance during G-Day. The kind of vibe around Carson from the people that I know who know somebody was also pretty positive as well. And Carson Beck, who, when he had a chance to emerge as a starting quarterback back in 2021 when JT Daniels was hurt prior to the UAB game, a game in which Stetson Bennett took his first step towards becoming a historic figure in this program, when Beck, who had the chance to be the starter that day and it didn't quite work out for him, that all of a sudden the Beck we see now in 2023 has, to me, just felt like a completely different quarterback, much more mature, much more ready for the moment now than he was then. And I think that Carson himself has even kind of admitted that and acknowledged that. So to conclude spring practice, I actually thought that Beck was far more out in front of the quarterback situation than I sort of expected him to be. And I've sort of been operating throughout the offseason here with, I don't want to say the certainty that Carson Beck was the quarterback, but I have definitely been treating Carson Beck in my mind as if he is, the starting quarterback, even if he's not been named. For all intents and purposes, this is his job here right now. And yet, as we get ready to begin fall camp sort of officially, this week, I sort of sense there's been a little bit of a vibe shift, a little bit around Georgia and the quarterback position. I sort of sense there's a little something going on here. Now, I could be wrong about this. Sometimes your intuition kind of fails you, and I'm not saying this means that Carson Beck won't be the starting quarterback. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm just noticing a vibe shift, and then some of this is actually kind of played out on our show here just a little bit. I've played this clip for you before, but I want to play it for you again as a way of just kind of reinforcing what I'm talking about. Jake Fromm, who at one point in time on our show said what we all kind of believe, which is the job is Carson Beck's to lose. When he was on with us a couple of weeks ago, Jake said, hey, maybe the door is open here for a Brock Vandagriff or a Gunnar Stockton. Maybe that door is open here a little bit as the practices officially get ready to get going. Let me give you a reminder of Jake Fromm on this because it kind of sets us up for where we want to go after that. This is Jake Fromm.
It's about to get real for those guys, man. It's about to come in, competing. And I think what the rest of the team wants to see is a guy who's going to be consistent, compete every day, and really take the bull by the horns and be a great leader for this team throughout camp, man. Camp's tough. It's a grind. I didn't want to see the same guy in and out of the huddle every single day. So, as far as the competition going on, Carson wasn't there at SEC Media Days. So maybe it might be slightly more open than we might think.
So Jake saying, well, you didn't take Carson Beck to SEC Media Days, and maybe perhaps thinking about some other things there too, says perhaps this quarterback competition is more open right now than we all think. So Jake saying that, kind of got me thinking about that a little bit more. Is there a chance that Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton are in this and competing, more alongside Carson Beck than I perhaps considered them to be after a G-Day performance, which I thought that Carson Beck, played well enough to be the Georgia starting quarterback, was kind of treated like the Georgia starting quarterback, sort of gave off the vibe of being the Georgia starting quarterback. I sort of concluded April thinking, well, Carson's probably your guy there. I feel like I've seen enough. That was the vibe then, but the vibe seems to maybe be shifting now. Now, some of this could just be, hey, we're just hungry for storylines and you want to consider all possibilities. That may be what some of this is, but some of this may also be the fact that Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton really are still yet to be heard from fully and officially, and their moment to make their move may just now truly be occurring. I'll tell you a guy who also seems to believe that is another great former Georgia quarterback. That's David Green, who, going back to the early 2000s, working, with Mike Bobo as a quarterback's coach, set records at Georgia. One of the most prolific passers in SEC history, one of the most, prominent winners in NCAA history at the time of his career. He was on the show last week. He also talked about the nature of this quarterback competition, and while he has great respect for Carson Beck, as we would all do, given the Beck skill set that we've seen, once again, David Green kind of making the case for the other quarterbacks in this competition, contributing to what I said before. At least for now, seems like a little bit of a vibe shift. David Green here on the subject of the Georgia quarterback situation from our show last week.
All the reports you hear from Carson Beck is he's done a phenomenal job of stepping in, commanding the offense. I think a lot of people can see and kind of get a feel for how athletic, Brock Vandagriff is. I mean, he's got a huge arm. I remember watching him play a number of times in high school as well. The one thing that may possibly give him an edge at times as well is I heard an interview at one point. They asked Kirby, do you evaluate the quarterback position any differently now since Stetson has been here? And he said, no, not really. But he did say, I do put more stock in mobile quarterbacks. And so I think that would be something just naturally. Vandagriff's probably a little more athletic and run the football a little bit better. And so I think that's something that could maybe give him an edge a little bit. And then when you look at Gunner, I think Gunner to me is just one of those guys that he just kind of has an it factor a little bit. Like you can't really always put your finger on what makes him unique, but he's kind of one of those guys that when the ball is in his hand, you kind of think that you're going to go down and score.
Do you get what I'm saying here on this? Sort of sounds like David Green, a guy who knows the quarterback position, Jake Fromm, a guy who knows the quarterback position. Sort of seems like, as of right now, they are not counting out these other guys. And listen, once again, we make our predictions. My prediction is that Carson Beck will be Georgia's starting quarterback, barring injury, I believe, for the entire season. That's my prediction here right now. I saw a lot from him this spring that I liked. But when smart guys like Jake and David are making the case for Brock and Gunner, I got to listen to that. I got to acknowledge that. And I got to be a little bit more open-minded going into summer camp that Kirby Smart, who has certainly done everything he can to make it be known this competition is still open. He told ESPN back at Media Days that it would be wrong to assume that Carson Beck has done enough to be the starting quarterback. He may be ahead in the competition. His experience may give him a leg up, but it's not over. It's not done with. And when you hear other Georgia quarterbacks accentuate the reasons why that might be true, we ought to be left to conclude that it's not just Coach Speak from Kirby Smart. It's not just something that he's saying. It's something that that we ought to consider. So I am of the belief that whatever's going to happen at Georgia for the quarterback spot, it's not going to be a secret. Success leaves clues. If Carson looks great this summer, we'll probably hear that. There'll be whispers because, boosters and, all kinds of folks will see some of the scrimmages and stuff. This is not really a secret, right? I mean, people will have eyes on these Georgia scrimmages in August. So if Carson Beck is lighting the world on fire, we'll hear that. If a Brock Vandagriff is making a big push to maybe unseat Carson Beck, Kirby Smart will talk about that. He won't keep that a secret. He'll elevate that because if Brock's truly emerging, that only has the potential to either make Brock better for having overtaken Carson, or it makes Carson better for having held off Brock. So if Brock really is kind of pushing the competition, Kirby Smart, I believe, will be more than happy to elevate that idea and let us all know about it because it just kind of spices up the competition, which is ultimately what Kirby Smart kind of wants to do in all of these kinds of things. So, maybe we ought to consider, hey, this is an open competition, and there is still some room for mystery and intrigue. After all, Georgia's had a way of surprising us at the quarterback spot before. And we ought to know that in some form or fashion, we'll get some clues about where all of this might be eventually heading based on the way that players and coaches talk about all this and what the Whisper campaign, which there always is every August, what the Whisper campaign is telling us about all of this. It could be a fun competition. It's certainly going to provide plenty of mystery and intrigue for Georgia fans who I know, no doubt, are watching all of this very closely. And that is Around the DawgHouse here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia here today. And we are glad to have you with us. Before we're done, we're going to do a little bit of a look back on kind of, I guess, some of the important milestones in DawgNation Daily history. Some of these are kind of wild to think about. We'll go back and look at some of that here in a little bit. So we'll have some fun with that. Also today on the program, a former Georgia assistant has had some pretty big talk out there right now, which has gotten a lot of attention in a way that typically doesn't happen for guys when they work at Georgia, but apparently you go somewhere else and all of a sudden things get a little bit different. So we'll tell you what's out there on that. Also, we could be right at the cusp of a major change coming to college football. We've had so much of that as of late, and more of that could be on the way here. So a lot to kind of get to with all of that. We'll cover all of those bases before we're done on episode 2000. But for now, a guy who's been on a good number of these episodes throughout the years, I'm glad to have him both as a guest and one-time producer and everything else in between. It's Connor Riley here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Let's talk to him right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Got a great new graphics package for the show. Casey, our terrific team member, has kind of put some of that together for us. So our graphic here for Connor Riley looks great. Nice looking picture there for him. All kinds of fun stuff going on. Connor's picture taken inside Sanford Stadium, which is kind of a cool thing to be able to see there. So, Connor, welcome to the show, episode 2000. What a great guest to have, because you have been a part of so many of these episodes throughout the years. So I certainly appreciate you being with us here today.
Yeah, it's unbelievably cool to get to celebrate this milestone with you. I can honestly say I would not be where I am today or who I am today without you, your presence, your friendship. And so this is really cool that we get to do this every Tuesday, and I look forward to another 2,000 shows and plenty more memories and fun times along the way with UGA.
Thank you, Connor. I really appreciate it. That's incredibly nice of you to say, and I'm certainly proud of the things that we've gotten to do together and looking forward to the things we will do together here coming up in the years to come. And one of the things I was talking about before you joined us is that when you see some of the stuff that's out there, you're kind of reminded of why a show like this even exists to begin with, because I do think that Georgia fans have a perspective that deserves to be heard. You can't trust the national media to share that perspective correctly. They just simply won't do it. They're just too far away to even be aware of it in some cases. It's not necessarily malicious. It's just, ignorance more than anything else. And so you wrote the story at DawgNation.com yesterday. Jim Harbaugh saying, we're going to have 20 guys get drafted, It's quite a bold claim on the part of Harbaugh, and Georgia fans notice that kind of stuff, and they notice when Marvin Harrison Jr. and Ryan Day, whine about what they're whining about. The Big Ten officials on the take there as well; they're whining about this too. What happened in the Peach Bowl a year ago? Alabama fans spent the entire 2021 offseason, or going into the 2022 season, whining. ESPN Game Day hosts are making the case for teams other than Georgia, despite the fact that UGA's won the last 2 national championships. And Connor, as you know, Georgia fans are just going to notice this stuff, and they are going to keep the receipts. And when Georgia goes out, and if they go for 3-23, Georgia fans are going to bring this stuff back up, because that's the way that sports works. And so I don't think Georgia fans have to apologize for feeling a little bit slighted about the ongoing shopping spree to sort of find something other than Georgia to talk about.
When you're on top of the college football world, teams are going to take shots at you. In the Michigan case, I think it's pretty clear that Michigan views Georgia as a standard in college football right now, and they're using that as motivation, I think, to push themselves forward and try and take that next step. Now, Michigan had a chance to meet Georgia last year, and really there's no other way to say this, really crapped the bed against TCU, a team that, based on what we saw in the national championship game, if Michigan is as talented as that team seems to think it is, they should have beaten TCU rather easily, and they found a way to lose that game. And so, the Ohio State stuff, to an extent, they can't control what they're asked, and, you can at least appreciate the candor there, but at a certain point, it is time to move on. I will say this, for all the talk that Ohio State has been making this offseason, and for all that Michigan has been saying, it might be really, really funny at the end of the season if Penn State goes unbeaten and wins the Big Ten, the Big Ten representative, and these two, Big Ten powers spent all this time talking and they couldn't even win their own division.
Yeah, that would certainly be funny indeed. And my overall opinion on the Harbaugh thing may be a little bit different than you might expect, because while I think it's ridiculous that they would have 20 players get drafted, I think that's patented nonsense. I would much rather you talk big about something that hasn't happened yet but could happen, as opposed to someone like Ryan Day or Marvin Harrison Jr. talking big about some sort of hypothetical that has no chance of happening. You understand what I'm saying here? Like Marvin Harrison Jr. says, if I hadn't gotten hurt, we would have won. Now, I don't believe that's true, but we'll never know one way or another, because that can't happen. That is a hot take about a hypothetical scenario. There's nothing more annoying to me than that. Where in the case of Jim Harbaugh, he may be shooting his mouth off in a way that's cartoonishly foolish, but one way or another, this is something that we can go back later on and say, did this turn out to be true? And if Harbaugh has 20 players drafted, or even if he has like 17 or 18 players drafted, we can say, hey, you know what, Jim Harbaugh was kind of onto something. Maybe he knew something we didn't. If he has something far less than that, which I believe is likely, then we can kind of hold his feet to the fire. So I'd much rather somebody like Jim Harbaugh talk big about something that could happen in the future as opposed to someone like, say, Ryan Day or Marvin Harrison Jr., who are talking big about some sort of hypothetical from the past. The woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff, I think, is completely a waste of time. At least Jim Harbaugh is talking big about something that might be able to be judged one way or another.
Yeah, and it's not Jim Harbaugh's fault. He doesn't have a Cobra / Tom Skerritt in his life to tell him, hey, your mouth's writing checks your body can't cash. And look, Jim Harbaugh knows how talented firsthand that 2021 Georgia team was, because they met up on the field together with a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line and just got annihilated for the entirety of that game there. And look, that was a Georgia team that got 15 draft picks, and mind you, like John Fitzpatrick was drafted, and he didn't even get invited to the combine. And so, the record for combine invites is 14. And so, it's an incredible thing to ponder. But again, it'd be one thing if you said, yeah, I think this team is talented enough, they have enough draft eligible guys to where they can reset that record. It's one thing to do it, by one or two. Georgia beat LSU, the 2019/2020 NFL Draft LSU team, by one. To top that by an additional 5 is a little ridiculous. And, again, it's a nice round number to say, yeah, we're going to have 20 draft picks. 18 draft picks isn't quite as catchy in the middle of August as 20 might sound.
And I'll say one more thing about this, and we'll talk about something different. What's funny about, like, Kirby Smart is in the year they had 15 draft picks, I know Mike Griffith asked him about this a few times, and Kirby kind of always undersold Georgia's draft potential. You remember this, which is not to say that he doesn't believe in his players or anything like that, but the idea that he would in any way like validate some sort of record-breaking, prediction or do like Harbaugh is and say we're going to shatter that record. We're going to go way above that. Like I keep remembering, like in the year in which Georgia had the 15 draft picks, Kirby Smart was asked about that throughout the year, and he always kind of undersold that. He always kind of was much, I guess, more shy about making some sort of proclamation like that. Harbaugh is just a different cat all the way around, I guess. But it's really interesting to think about Kirby Smart the year that Georgia had the 15 draft picks, just how differently he talked about the draft potential on his team.
Yeah, it speaks to, we rarely see Kirby come out and celebrate. You maybe get it, 15 minutes after the SEC championship game, another 15 after a potential college football playoff win. And then, he treats himself and gives himself, 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on, how long the post-game festivities last in the national championship game. That's pretty much it we see from a happy Kirby Smart throughout the year, or one who's going to pound his chest and celebrate. I was standing behind him at the national championship game this past year when he's, running down the sideline holding up the 3 fingers.
Yeah.
To say we're going for a 3-peat, and it was one of the more like, I can't believe he just did that. Not because, the idea sprung into his head. I think that's a pretty common thing to think about, but just the fact that it ran so counter to, as you point out, everything we've sort of seen in the way Kirby Smart operates. Now, Jim Harbaugh's got a lot of friends in the NFL still from his time there with the San Francisco 49ers. Michigan has, been one of, I believe, the top 5 producing NFL draft programs in recent years, so you can understand why Harbaugh maybe thinks the way that he does. But to your larger point, it sort of just speaks to the difference of 2 guys who were born both on December 23rd, but Smart and Harbaugh go about doing things very different ways. And while they've both been very successful, Smart has been a little bit more successful in terms of reaching the mountaintop.
I'll also say this just really, really fast. You want to go back to the very beginning of our show, like 2016, near the front of all this. Back then we were talking about Harbaugh kind of a lot. Just being hired at Michigan and early satellite camp stuff and things like that. Like he was a pretty, controversial figure or certainly a lightning rod for discussion, back then. And then for a good number of years, we didn't talk about him at all. It's kind of funny to think we've sort of now kind of circled back to where Harbaugh is a guy that shows up on shows like this again, because Connor, for a good long while there at Michigan, he was relatively irrelevant. But, all of a sudden he sort of feels like a little bit more of a conversation starter around the sport than he would have, certainly more in the last few years, almost like it was when he first got hired for the job there.
Right. And, one, it does speak to the fact that Michigan is the only other team than Georgia to make the college football playoff in each of the last 2 years. But, it's amazing to think back, 2020 season, Joe Milton was starting for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, and that team was pretty poor, and Milton ultimately gets benched. And it's interesting to see the rise that Michigan has gone on, and separately, the path that Milton has taken and some of the hype that has surrounded him. I think going into now the 2023 season, people have that Tennessee game, not just Georgia fans, but national media types have that Tennessee game circled. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how that all plays out. And then I think, if we're ranking interesting playoff matchups, if Ohio State, Georgia is number one, Georgia, Michigan might be number two is what Harbaugh had to say here in recent weeks.
So let me shift the gears here. And I said this a moment ago, and I want people to understand what I'm saying, and maybe they don't because I'm sure I'm probably easy to misunderstand from time to time. But I sense a little bit of a vibe shift right now, Connor. And this is not my prediction that Carson Beck won't be the starting quarterback, but it seems like the door is open now more than it was at the end of spring practice. And some of that may be just our natural desire for content and our natural desire to have things to talk about. I totally acknowledge that. But I left spring practice thinking I'd seen enough. Carson Beck is this team's quarterback, and that is not necessarily the way that I thought I would be after spring practice. Carson really won me over. Positive reviews from people who saw practices, what I, kind of saw with my own eyes on G-Day. I was kind of Team Carson and content to be that after spring practice. We've had a number of guests on our show the last week or so, the Jake Fromms, the David Greens, people like that. They're kind of talking about the possibility of other quarterbacks here, and it just seems like fans are kind of more open to this now than they would have been, a couple of months ago or whatever else. There's a little bit of a vibe right now where quarterback competition sort of feels open again. Am I just making that up, or do you kind of sense that vibe is kind of out there right now too?
You hear what people are saying, you hear the chatter, and you understand that. It is something to talk about, and this is sort of the reason why maybe you sometimes want to see a coach come out and name a starter, just because this stuff sort of lingers. And also, as we get closer to the season, sort of build, it's a natural way to build interest. I'll say this, again, what we saw on G-Day, if Carson Beck continues to play like that, he is going to be the starter. I have very little doubts about that. Having said that, and, it'll be interesting to see if they actually do the same against South Carolina, but it would not surprise me in the slightest, knowing what we know about Kirby Smart, knowing how, Brock Vandagriff's mobility is a big differentiator between him and Carson Beck, and you can include Gunnar Stockton there as well. And they're not going to be able to use that as often as they would like to in these fall camp practices because quarterbacks aren't allowed to be hit. It would not surprise me in the slightest if you saw against UT Martin, against Ball State, say on the third drive of the game, they trot Brock out there to sort of see what he can do and give him maybe perhaps a more fair chance to use his full skill set on display there. So, again, it's a long runway because Georgia doesn't just have the whole month of August, but I think they've got at least 2 games to start the season, maybe even a third one against UAB. And quite frankly, given the way South Carolina has been a non-competitive game when Kirby Smart has met Shane Beamer's team in recent years, you could throw that in there as well. So I do think that there's a possibility that we see this quarterback, quote-unquote, competition go into the season. But, Carson Beck hasn't done anything to show, at least to my knowledge, that he is losing this quarterback job or is letting it slip. I think it's just more a provocation of people wanting to talk about it and look at it from a more interesting point of view.
So what you're saying is interesting to me because you know that there's a big difference between playing the first half and playing the second half. And whether it be Tennessee Martin or whoever else, that there is a symbolic value in if Georgia were to bring a Vandagriff in the first quarter of a game, early second quarter of a game, that to me is a signal that they are doing more than just treating him like a typical backup. They are still evaluating him to see what he might be able to do. And that could very well be a smart thing because of injuries. We've seen, SEC quarterbacks get hurt a lot. That's been a big part of the story in this league. Going back the last few years, Georgia's also had surprise emergencies at quarterback before. No one would have expected Stetson Bennett to be the guy that he became. Maybe Brock Vandagriff deserves the same chance to demonstrate in live action what he's capable of doing. But if you play Brock in the first half of a game, Tennessee Martin, whoever else, then you are signaling, I think, to most of us that you may potentially view him as more than just a backup.
And to that point, I think there have been a couple of examples throughout Kirby Smart's time at Georgia to where he has done that, played a quarterback in the first half. Maybe not so much to indicate that there is going to be a change or anything along the lines of that, but to get that backup potentially more reps. Go back to the UAB game in 2021. JT Daniels was out that day. Carson Beck, despite having what we now know is a pretty poor week of practice, Georgia still put him out there for that third drive of the game. And in fact, if I'm remembering correctly, multiple drives in the first half there to sort of see what he got. And then the next week, when Daniels came back, Kirby Smart put Stetson Bennett back in there in the first half of that game. Now, he threw an interception, and people were ready to lose their minds. There is value in that, in playing those guys in the first half. Against Vanderbilt, JT got hurt once again, and Stetson stepped in there. And so, as I think you're right to point out, it is a little bit of a bigger deal to play a guy in the first half than in the second half. And Georgia, I believe, is going to get plenty of reps in the second half of those games for a Brock, for a Gunnar Stockton, whoever wins that potential backup job there. But as you also point out, I think there's a lot of value in having a guy like Brock get live first-team reps in a game, even if it's against a different opponent, in those chances that you get. Now, obviously, you want to give Carson as many bites at the apple as you can, but we've sort of seen Carson in those situations before. End of the game last year against Vanderbilt, against TCU in the national championship game. We've sort of seen, Carson at least get his feet wet a little bit and have a runway to work with. Brock Vandagriff still hasn't completed a pass in the college football game. And so if Georgia is serious about developing quarterbacks, that's something you're going to need, as the 2021 season saw, as the 2020 season told us. I think there is probably some serious consideration to ultimately maybe give the backup some more first-team reps in the course of the early season schedule there.
I want to finish. I know it's kept you long, and I apologize. But I do want to finish a little bit of UGA recruiting talk here in just a second because I think it's fascinating right now. Before that, though, let me remind you that you've got just a couple of days left to get involved in our Celebrating Teachers contest courtesy of Kroger. We're obviously getting ready to go back to school. In fact, we got some systems going back to school here today. A lot of them by the end of the week will be back. And obviously, we're celebrating teachers as we do all of that. We need your help to be able to do that. If you go to DawgNation.com, you can nominate an outstanding teacher to be honored courtesy of our friends at Kroger. Now, if the teacher that you nominate wins the prize, you yourself get to be a winner too. You can get a $50 gift card courtesy of Kroger and a DawgNation give bag, which includes a T-shirt and some of the cool stuff there as well. So just for nominating, you can be a winner. But our teachers that we announce next week are going to get a collection of gift cards: $100 to Kroger, $50 to Home Chef and Bath and Body Works, and of course Target there as well. 4 great gift cards coming to you, courtesy of our friends at Kroger here right now, if you were one of our outstanding teachers. So please go to DawgNation.com, nominate a teacher. Each day next week, we're going to announce one of our winners. You've got until Friday to get involved on that. So make sure you do all of that today. All right, Connor, to finish things up here today, it's certainly, or finish things up with you anyway, it certainly seems that the situation around UGA recruiting is fascinating right now. You had the emergence of Auburn over the weekend. It seems like they try to put their best foot forward and make a big impression on, in some cases, a couple of UGA commits. Obviously, a guy like KJ Bolden, who's a major UGA target. You've got all kinds of mystery and intrigue out there with Williams-Winery, what might be going down there. You've got Georgia, I think, seemingly in a pretty good spot with a really fun running back like Nate Frazier, a couple of other defensive linemen, McCray and Breland, maybe another linebacker kind of floating out there too. How do you kind of see all of this coming together for Georgia right now, and for the potential angst of what maybe Auburn might have done with a Bolden, or what a Missouri or Oklahoma might be capable of doing with a Winery? Like, what's real and what's not in your mind? You want to separate fact from fiction with us on a little bit of this?
Yeah, it's one of those things where as we get closer and closer to the commitment dates, more rumors and stuff start to fly, and intel gets thrown out there in terms of who's going where. With Bolden, you shouldn't be surprised by maybe the surge that Auburn has been making. We heard Florida State was making a push recently. Ohio State was at one time making a real big push on this. Clemson was in there. That's just sort of how his recruitment has gone. And so I would say Georgia has been the one consistent team there throughout his recruitment, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes there. I know Dylan Raiola has just moved in to Buford, and so he is now technically a Gwinnett County recruit. The last time Georgia landed a Gwinnett County recruit was a five-star Gwinnett County recruit, was Isaac Nada back in 2016, and he spent his senior year at IMG Academy. If you want to count a true guy who stayed in Gwinnett County for the majority of his high school career, where that was where he was recruited, that was where he played. Because remember, Nada at one point was committed to Florida State when he was at IMG Academy, and so that is something to sort of watch along the lines there. You'd have to go back to the pre-Kirby Smart days and Lorenzo Carter to find the last time Georgia landed a five-star out of Gwinnett County. And so I think that is absolutely something to watch there. With Frazier, you and I have had some conversations about Del McGee and maybe some of the running back talent that they have, or in more important cases, have not brought in recent cycles. I still think Georgia's really going to regret this year not landing Justice Haynes in last year's cycle. But landing a guy like Nate Frazier, I think is going to go a long way to re-solidifying this running back room, especially when you consider the different types of guys that they have. I think Dwight Phillips could maybe one day develop in a James Cook type role where, because of his speed and athleticism, you're able to move him around the formation and use him in a variety of different ways. Bowens, I think, is sort of your classic Del McGee big style running back, and then Frazier is a type of running back Georgia hasn't really landed in some time under McGee. And so it'll be interesting to see how things close out there. And then as far as William Winery, I'm not even sure if he's going to commit by the next time we talk. I know there was talk of him doing August 1st. There's talk of him doing August 2nd, 7th. Anytime a recruit has to cancel a visit because of quote-unquote family discipline reasons, I think that signals that this recruitment is sort of all over the place, and we'll see if Georgia is ultimately able to land Winery there. But it should be a really fun recruiting week, and there's a chance that, traditionally for a signing day, such a big time of the year, there's a chance that most of Georgia's work is already going to be done and cleaned up before they play their first game, much less they're waiting around in December to find out what's going to happen next.
Connor, it is a fascinating time. We can't wait to talk more about this and see it all plays out. And obviously, real recruiting rivals emerge here for the Dogs, and Georgia's going to have to battle down to the wire to bring some of these guys in. So we'll see how it goes. Obviously, looking ahead to Saturday when KJ Bolden does make his announcement, and we'll see how real some of this has actually been as it relates to Bolden. So we'll do that then. And thanks for being here on episode 2000 here today.
Yep. As always, it was a pleasure, BA. Look forward to another 2000.
Thank you, sir.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, so we reach, Saturday becomes that big day. KJ Bolden making the announcement. Obviously, it's we're still a couple weeks away from, say, high school football, so you need, one more thing to kind of, sort of bide your time on the weekend to get there. And so a Bolden announcement on Saturday certainly goes a long way towards doing that. We'll look forward to kind of having more of that coming up with y'all then there at that particular point in time. We'll also look forward to seeing some of you on our DawgNation Cruise coming up in April. Many of you are wondering, hey, what do you get a guy who celebrates his 2000th episode of the show? Well, listen, the best gift you could ever be giving me would be to join us on the DawgNation Cruise, April 22nd through the 26th. That's in 2024, of course. We're leaving from Port Canaveral, which is kind of like my home port, just down the road from where we are here in the Atlanta area. You go past Orlando, you're basically at Port Canaveral. So it's super convenient to drive to, which is always a great thing. Going to a Perfect Day Coco K again, which is kind of a have-to for me. I love Perfect Day Coco K. Always have a good time. Occasionally have too much fun, but always have a good time when it comes to Perfect Day Coco K. Nassau and the Bahamas, of course, as well. And staterooms are limited because it's bigger and better than it's ever been before. And so many of you have already jumped on board literally because we're on an Oasis-class ship here this upcoming year. Allure of the Seas, one of the largest cruise ships at sea. So many fun neighborhoods. You've got the Central Park. You've got the boardwalk area. You've got so many cool things. The Aqua Theater on the back of the ship. This is a really incredible experience. And it's going to include you here, hopefully, in April of 2024. So Jessica Slater, great travel agent, put a wonderful website together. It's royaldogs.com. That is royaldogs.com. Go there, find out all the details about the DawgNation Cruise, make the decision that hundreds of other folks have already made, which is to join us on that DawgNation Cruise for April of 2024. Cannot wait for that. All right. So it seems like we have had so much change as of late when it comes to everything in college sports, with the SEC grabbing Texas and Oklahoma, and then the Big Ten grabs USC and UCLA. We've got playoff expansion. We've got all kinds of new things on the horizon, and we are led to believe that there's even more change to get used to in the very near future. We already know that Colorado is leaving the Pac-12 to go to the Big 12. And the point that I made to you the other day is that while that may seem small, and we'll have more on that in a moment from the perspective of someone who does think it's small and meaningless, at least seemingly, while that may seem small, what it really is the weakest of the Pac-12 teams leaving and going somewhere else, that then puts the spotlight on the next teams on the next lowest rung of the ladder to make the same decision. Because ultimately the Pac-12 media rights deal is slated to come out. It is expected to be pretty small in terms of the per-team payout, and that's going to make some teams feeling pretty nervous. Teams that have a chance to jump to the Big 12, they may want to do that. This is kind of in the weeds here a little bit, but it's worth your attention. There is an Arizona Board of Regents meeting. I believe it's today. Now, the Board of Regents are like the, sort of fancy folks who kind of run the universities. All the big decisions made by universities are made, via the Board of Regents. And so the Board of Regents in this case kind of runs both Arizona and Arizona State. And there is some thought that the Board of Regents meeting there in Arizona might include some sort of discussion about the future of both Arizona and maybe Arizona State in the Pac-12. I've been of the belief that Arizona was certainly a threat to leave because that's kind of like the next weakest team, next weakest program in the Pac-12. But I guess the thought coming out of the state is, well, if the University of Arizona leaves, then Arizona State, who's a little stronger and probably a little bit more tied into the Pac-12, they may be looking to leave too. And at that point in time, it's just sort of over. At that point in time, you just are basically about over and done with when it comes to the Pac-12, because Utah, which is another one of those, they call them like the four corner states, because if you ever look on the map, like those states look like rectangles. They're like perfectly drawn, sharp corners, so they're kind of called the four corner states. Utah is one of the four corner states programs who's kind of reaffirmed its pledge to the Pac-12 recently. But if the Arizona schools and Colorado are both leaving, then I think Utah's got to look around and say, are we sure we want to be here either? And then the Big 12, if they're able to gain this, now we don't know yet what the Arizona school is going to do, but if they do, give an overture to the idea of leaving, then the Big 12 gets way stronger in the process of all this. Because while, Colorado and the Arizona schools and even potentially Utah don't necessarily have a whole lot of cachet necessarily, what they do have are late TV windows. These are West Coast programs that offer late television inventory for the Big 12, which does make that more lucrative to the television partners that are out there. That's the value here, those sort of four corners state schools. And so we may hear more today, as soon as today, on what the future of the Pac-12 is, and that could certainly be pretty fascinating to see kind of how all of that plays out here. But the Colorado move is potentially the first step in what could eventually result in the basic disillusion of the Pac-12 as a conference, which makes what Oregon coach Dan Lanning said yesterday, I think, pretty interesting. Now, y'all know I'm a big Dan Lanning fan. Most of you are, too. I actually think in the success story of Georgia over the course of the last couple of years, I think that Lanning's actually kind of an underrated figure. I thought that Dan had a very good role in that 2021 defense. Oftentimes, it's just sort of thought to be the overall talent, the influence of Kirby Smart as a defensive-minded head coach. But Lanning, who had opportunity to get big bucks to go be the Texas defensive coordinator in 2021, turned that down, stayed at Georgia. I thought that was a huge story for Georgia on that way to that first national championship for Kirby Smart back then. So Lanning's a very, very cool guy in my book. I'm a big, big fan of Dan Lanning's overall. But Lanning yesterday, kind of took a shot at Colorado leaving the Pac-12, saying, I'm going to paraphrase here, something to the effect of, well, so when's the last time that program won anything? And they ever won anything of note? Basically, insinuating that Colorado didn't bring anything to the Pac-12 because they were not a competitive football team. And on the one hand, it is true. Colorado right now, of the Power 5 programs, is one of the 3 or 4 probably weakest in all of major college football. What Lanning says there from that standpoint is probably true. But whether Lanning knows this and is pretending he doesn't, or if he doesn't know this, the Colorado move from the Pac-12 to the Big 12, I think makes actually a pretty big problem for Lanning in particular, because he's the coach at Oregon. He recently signed a contract extension to stay there. They're obviously really happy with him. Lanning kind of viewed Oregon as probably one of the 30 biggest jobs in all of college football. So when he had a chance to leave Georgia's defensive coordinator to go to Oregon, it was a big career move for him. But the value of the Oregon coaching job, I believe, has been diminished by Colorado leaving the Pac-12, because Colorado leaving the Pac-12, as I said a moment ago, opens the door for other programs to also leave the Pac-12 there too. all of a sudden, if you're Oregon, you're looking around. It's sort of like the Will Smith gif, which I guess like the second gif I've referenced in the show today, of the empty living room at his Bel Air mansion. You sort of look around, you're like, where did everybody go? Because guess what? If the Big Ten was going to invite Oregon to join, they already would have. If the Big Ten was going to invite Washington to join, I think they already would have. I just don't know that offer is out there here right now. So, certainly the Pac-12 really needs Oregon, because Oregon and Washington are the two marquee schools in that league right now, and probably two larger marquee schools than currently exist in the Big 12. But there's also this sense in which Oregon sort of needs a conference to play in there as well. And I don't know that the Big Ten is going to be it. I just don't know that the Big Ten is all that interested in any further expansion, because I don't know they think that Oregon and Washington are a net plus to them from a revenue standpoint. It would be additional teams. It would get them into the Pacific Northwest, but they've already got L.A. I don't know they feel like they need the Pacific Northwest right now. So I don't know if Dan Lanning knows this and is just sort of playing, kind of 3D chess with the public, or if he's not aware of this yet. But I think that he's hitched his wagon to Oregon, signed a long contract extension there as a coach. But the overall value of the Oregon coaching job, I believe, has been diminished by the fact that the league they play in right now, the Pac-12, does not have a very certain future. And if the Pac-12 goes away, to me, it's not obvious where Oregon's going to go. So maybe all this plays out. Certainly there's plenty of revenue around the Oregon program. I'm sure they'll have a home somewhere. But a lot of this is pretty uncertain here right now. And, I hate it for a guy like Lanning, who I think of as a great coach, and I think he's in a good spot there. But through no fault of their own, completely out of their control, the Pac-12 may be dissolving around them. One more thing here for our cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Obviously, when you do a show like ours, listen, I'm going to shoot my mouth off a lot, and some of the stuff that I say may end up being wrong when it's all said and done. The other day, we were kind of I did this on Twitter, and we talked about the show a little bit. Mike Griffith brought this up. I was making fun of Arch Manning's signature, and I don't have this to show for you. I should have put this on the video screen. But so Manning signed a contract with Panini, which makes the football cards. And one of those was like an autographed football card. And I sort of thought that the Arch Manning signature did not really look like a signature befitting a Manning, some future star quarterback. I thought it was a little bit, I don't know. You could read it, but it just looked very juvenile. It just looked very young. I thought, a guy like Manning deserved a better signature than that. Well, guess what? Arch Manning gets the last laugh on me for sure on this, because there's a story. So the first of those cards produced by Panini was actually auctioned for charity. And the price that was paid for the Manning autograph, now some of this is influenced by the charitable cause, but the price that the card sold for was $102,500. That was the winning bid on the autograph card that I was making fun of the other day. And the charity that it benefits, I'm going to read this. Let's see. So the charity that it benefits goes to the St. David's Foundation in Austin, Texas, which is a healthcare organization. So benefiting this basically like a hospital, I guess. $102,000 for the Arch Manning card. So I sort of laughed at his signature, didn't think it looked like a Manning, but ultimately the card was worth $100,000 to somebody. So I guess Arch Manning gets the last laugh on me on that. We'll make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, coming up here in a moment, we're going to, I guess, sort of celebrate some of the, sort of the key milestone moments here for DawgNation Daily. I'll do that for you here briefly in a moment. But speaking of some, great facts and figures to be aware of, how about our friends at Discover Dunwoody, who, listen, you're getting ready for all kinds of fun stuff coming up here this year, maybe traveling to Atlanta for things like that. Dunwoody, great place to be when you're talking about being here in the Atlanta area, because like right here where our studio is, we're kind of in the Dunwoody, Sandy Springs area. We're kind of at the intersection of the Dunwoody MARTA station, the Sandy Springs MARTA station. So if you want to get into Buckhead or downtown or wherever else, you got easy access to be able to get there. Plus, you get a chance to enjoy some of the best dining options in the Atlanta area and an incredible collection of hotel rooms there as well. I'm talking about 21 different hotel rooms, 2,100, I should say, 2,100 different hotel rooms spread across 9 hotels, all kinds of sort of family-friendly environments around here there too, plus more than 200 restaurants, fine dining and special cuisines, all kinds of really cool stuff. If you've not been in this area in a while, you wouldn't believe just how grown up and developed the dining scene is around here, and obviously the hotels and the travel and the shopping make that a big part of that too. More than 300 different places to shop. So we love where we work here every day. We love hanging out with folks at the local restaurants and obviously being a part of the scene there too. And if you're coming into the Atlanta area, you want access to like Buckhead and downtown and all that, really simple and easy and kind of a family-friendly type way. Well, Dunwoody's a great place to go for all of that. So please make sure you check out discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. That's discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. You can find out more about all of that. You think about SEC Championship December or maybe some of the stuff in the fall before that, discoverdunwoody.com/DawgNation. Great place to go to find out all the fun things happening around the Dunwoody area as we move ahead to a fall of 2023. All right, so as you know, today is our 2000th episode. And so once again, the folks here at DawgNation kind of put a little graphic together of all the things here. How about 35 million total? Look at this. Look at this. Can we let's come back on camera here just for a second. We'll show that here in a moment. How about this? A little cake here on the on the set on the desk. Unbelievable here. So, by the way, it smells great too. By the way, 35 million, I guess, views on video. More than 28 million on the podcast. We don't talk about the numbers a lot, but I guess today's the day to do that. Folks from all 50 states, 25 different countries. So we gave out our first golden shoe on December of 2020. On February of 2018 was the first time that Eddie made his debut here on the show. We've done it on 6 different studios, including my closet at my house there at one point in time. We were on first show ever came August 31st of 2015. We were on video for the first time in February of 2017. What a fun and a cool thing. It's really kind of amazing. So thanks for the folks who kind of put all that kind of stuff together, celebrating a lot of really cool milestones for all of us. Great to kind of go back and think about that. How about, is it one, I'm not even sure, total minutes consumed. Is that 1,500,000,000? Is that what that is? 1,500,000,000 minutes consumed? 25 million hours consumed? That's amazing. That's amazing. Is that correct? That is really, 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 really something. So thank you to all of you there for that. And how about this here on the desk here? How about the cake? Congratulations on 2,000 episodes. You got the DawgNation Daily in the front here. Man, that is really something to see. And that is something I am truly very proud of. Can you believe that? What a great celebration. What a good time. So much fun on all that. And listen to, Michael and Kaylee are here today, and all the folks behind the scenes that you don't ever get a chance to see, BJ and Todd and Casey, of course, who's become such an important part of my life, what we do around here. Beth Bowers, who's kind of been a great, colleague of ours, for a long time. Obviously, the folks that are on the show each week, like our DawgNation team of Connor today, Mike and Jeff. Great former players like Terrence and John, everybody else who've joined us there as well. Jake Fromm now. I mean, I could not do this without all the people who make it possible. And I'm truly very thankful. I'm truly very thankful. I'm not always really good at talking about myself. I love talking about Georgia football. I don't always love talking about myself. So I guess I'm a little shy about some of this kind of stuff. But boy, what an incredible thing, and what a wonderful cake, and wonderful stuff today. So for all of you, whether you've been with us for a handful of episodes or for a few of you who've been with us for all 2,000, thank you so much, very much, for making really this the time of my life. And I can't wait to see what the next 2,000 episodes look like. We appreciate you being a part of what we do here each and every day. And, of course, as we've been doing since December of 2020, giving out those golden shoes. We've actually given out more than 1,000 of those by now, I think. So that's obviously a really fun and cool thing. And we've got one to give out here today. On Saturday, I had a chance to be with our friends over at CA Autographs for a great event with Mark Richt, I should say. Former coach Mark Richt, and a great collection of former Georgia players, and a great bunch of dog fans there too. Jennifer Sperlin shared this on Twitter. She said, I finally got to meet Mr. DawgNation himself, and so it's great to meet them on Saturday. As I'm looking at the picture, for those of you watching on video, a lot more gray hair now than there was when we started this thing in August 2015. I also think that lighting's not doing me any favors right there, but nonetheless, a lot more gray hair than there used to be. But Jennifer, thanks there on that. How about the brand new golden shoe graphic too? How good does that look? That was a gift to me in honor of our 2000th episode. So fun stuff there. Jennifer will give you a golden shoe. And by the way, lousy, stinking Gators. Let me tell you something. Even on episode 2000, we may be in a good mood, but we're not taking it easy on those lousy, stinking Gators, and Georgia won't be doing that either. 88 days from right now. Gator Hater Countdown. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow for episode 2001 of DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We'll look forward to talking to you then. So how about this? Look at the cake here, folks. I mean, is that fun to see or what? Total surprise there on that. Congratulations on 2,000 episodes. This is fantastic. This is a really cool thing, and thanks to everybody involved in all of that. What a just a wonderful celebration. Something I am so proud of. Kaylee, your microphone's not on. You want to turn on the microphone so you can say that? Oh, yeah, it's chocolate, too. So, yeah, I will enjoy that. So, we absolutely, that is really fun stuff, great stuff. Thank you very much, and we'll definitely have a good time with all of that here in just a little bit. For now, we'll take your comments here. A little late getting to the comments. I apologize. Kind of having a little bit of a run of long shows as of late. But we're happy to do all that with you here today. And we can't. I can't. I'm sorry. I can't hear the microphone.
Kaylee was in here tearing up when you were going through that.
Listen, I'm sure there are a lot of people who have cause to cry on the show for many years for very different reasons. So, Kaylee, that's really nice. And Kaylee, one of the newest members of our DawgNation team. So we're very happy to have her here today. I'm actually going to start on our comments on Facebook today because that's where we started on video all those years ago. Miriam Corbin says, I've enjoyed almost every show from the start. BA, that's awesome to hear. She says, here's to thousands of episodes more. Thank you, Miriam. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Kent Holcomb says, Dog's going to win another natty no matter what. I sort of agree with that there as well. Sandy Price says, Ryan Day should spend more time worrying about beating Michigan. That's pretty good stuff. Ken Feinberg says the episode he want to hear is the first conversation with Mike as he's leaving Knoxville behind. Yeah, that's kind of funny. Ken, pretty funny stuff there. Brandon Griffin says, congratulations on 2,000 shows and over 1 billion Gator tears. Brandon, that's actually really good. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's really good stuff. Let's see what else. Jerry Popham says he hasn't been for all 2,000, but a great preponderance of them. And I even showed up on time on a few of them. Jerry, that's awesome stuff. I appreciate that. Pete Williams shouting out Jennifer Sperlin. Yeah, it was cool to meet her because, like, a lot of the folks, especially the Facebook names, because people kind of use their real name on Facebook, obviously more than they do on YouTube. You used to have to use your real name. Now I don't even think you'd necessarily do. But, early days like that, people would have, like, their Facebook name there, and I hear all these names, and I was always just kind of curious, like, who. I'm sure some of you are kind of curious who I am. Maybe I was just as curious about who many of y'all were. They kind of show up on Facebook on a daily basis. And so to hear, when she came up and said, hey, I'm Jennifer Sperlin, I was like, oh gosh, I've heard that name on Facebook for forever. So it was great to get a chance to meet her on Saturday. And for many of you who like that, I get a chance to meet. It's always a lot of fun. Doug Rayburn, thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. Sandy Price, thank you to you there too. Ryan Wilbanks says, I was listening to this show when it was just a podcast since 2016 and haven't missed a live show since. That's awesome, Ryan. I really, truly, genuinely appreciate that. Becky Rutledge says, Big Arch and Peyton bought that Little Arch card. Maybe they did for the $100,000. Maybe so. Santiago D. Arnold checking in to say, BA, you're the man. I appreciate that. Obviously, Santi's one of those guys that's been with us for a long time there, too, so I certainly appreciate that. Susan Levy, thank you for the kind words too. Truly appreciate you being with us. Really do. Thank you very much, and thanks for the kind words. That is an awesome thing to be able to see. We'll come back to Facebook here in a moment. Let me pop over and do some YouTube stuff here too. Let's see what else. Brady Gayton says he's got the same birthday as Kirby Smart and Jim Harbaugh. There you go, December the 23rd. That's kind of a cool thing to think about. I always say, it's not a coincidence that Kirby Smart's birthday is 2 days before Christmas and Nick Saban's birthday's on Halloween. There's a takeaway to have there on that, I think, probably. DawgHouse Lawn Care checking in. Always appreciate that. Darian Ford, thanks for the kind words there, too. Appreciate that. Alan Hampton says, Georgia excuses, if Ohio State hadn't played the game of their life, we would have won by 30. If they could kick straight, we would have blocked it, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, maybe that's the case, Alan. You may be right about that. Fred Gunn says, orange, as he calls it, is ugly no matter who wears it. I would totally agree with that. You don't see a whole lot of orange around these parts. No doubt about that. Nature Gator says a gator would have already consumed that ugly cake in one bite. I know Florida's got a couple players weighing in almost 400 pounds. I'm sure they could eat it in one bite. Yeah, I don't know if the strength and conditioning staff working quite as well for some of those Gators guys. But that's probably as close as nature's going to come to give me some congratulations, so I'll take that. Frank Patterson says, can you address 2 social media rumors? That Georgia's going to be wearing the black jerseys week 1 and the Big Ten's going to be trying to grab the 4 main ACC teams. All right, I'll take both those rumors. The first rumor, I'm fairly confident it's probably fake news because the first Georgia game's at 6. Y'all, 6 p.m. on September 3rd, it's still going to be 100 degrees. I don't think Georgia's wearing black jerseys that early in the season. If they wear them at all, I don't believe they're going to wear them that early in the season because that is hot still. That's still very, very hot. So if Georgia ever wears them, it'll probably be later in the year than that. As far as the Big Ten being interested in the ACC teams. So I told you about the Arizona Board of Regents thing a little earlier. Apparently this week there's also a Florida State meeting of similar stature, the Board of Regents types. I don't know how Florida State thinks they can break. If that is about conference realignment, I don't know how Florida State thinks they're going to break this contract. I really don't. Because, like, for a long time, this is what I think that some ACC teams were hopeful of. If you're a Florida State, a Clemson, a Miami, probably University of North Carolina, the four bigger teams in the ACC, I think what you were hopeful of is that, you know, the buyout penalty for leaving the ACC is so onerous that you would think that, you know, no team could really pay for it. But what those like ACC teams who have value other places were probably hopeful for well, if we could leave and enough other ACC teams would then also leave, then the ACC would essentially disband, and therefore there'd be nobody to pay the buyout to. That's what they're kind of hopeful for. You get my point? Is like, you know, you have to pay the buyout as long as there is an ACC. But if everybody just agreed to leave, there is no buyout left to pay. The problem with that is that 3/4 of the ACC would not have a conference to join. UNC would be valuable. Florida State would be valuable. Clemson would be valuable. Miami would be valuable. You know, Virginia Tech might have some value. Virginia actually might have some value. D.C. area, things like that. There may be some value there. But Boston College, no value. You know, Duke, Wake Forest, you know, schools like that just have very little they bring to the table. You know, Tech might have some value because of the Atlanta thing. But a lot of the ACC teams would not really have a conference to join. They just would not. I mean, Pitt probably doesn't have a ton of value, even though they've got, you know, a lot of, you know, football history. They don't have a ton of value. So those schools actually need the ACC to stick around. It may not be a great deal. It may be a weaker league. They may, you know, be getting less money paid out to them than you know, their brethren in other leagues are, but it's the best deal they got. So legally, they are going to do everything in their power to kind of keep Florida State and the whatnots in the league. So, you know, the idea that Florida State sort of finds some sort of wiggle room to get out of the contract, my guess is that'd be met with a bunch of lawsuits. That there are a lot of conferences, or I should say a lot of teams within the ACC that would just see their opportunity in major college athletics dissolve if the ACC dissolved. So they would take every legal recourse they could to keep a school like Florida State from leaving. But there is some chatter about Florida State here right now this week. They could make their next move towards trying to do something. But while the Big Ten may be actually more interested in Florida State than it would be like, say, Oregon, I just don't know how Florida State could legally do this. I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I don't know because I'm not smart enough. But just based on my understanding of all this, I don't get how they do that. I just don't get how they would. Crow King 123 says, let's nab Washington and Oregon. Yeah, it's like would the SEC want that Pacific Northwest expansion? Maybe so, but it's kind of one of those deals where, like, you know, Washington and Oregon clearly have value, but do they have excess value? Because what Oklahoma and Texas is they had excess value. In other words, they would bring more of a dowry into the league than they kind of take from it. Whereas in the case of Washington and Oregon, they have some value, but is it enough to justify like excess value for the league? I just don't know that it is. I just don't know. Like USC clearly is that biggest program in Los Angeles for the Big Ten. There was huge value there, and if you take USC, I guess you have to take UCLA, which probably has some value in its own right. But even when you get like the Florida States and the Clemsons of the world, they have some value, but it actually may not be necessarily what you think, because value to the boardroom folks is not always the same thing as value in competition. Like, would you want to see Georgia play Florida State, Clemson? Those would be good football games. But what makes for a good football game, what makes for a good football team, is not necessarily the same thing as what makes for kind of a valuable product in terms of conference realignment. Back in the late 2000 odds, right? When you had the first round of conference expansion that kind of got us to the SEC adding Missouri and Texas A&M in 2012. Conference expansion was very easy to understand back then. If a team brought you a new cable market, then you wanted them. Missouri had huge value to the SEC because it brought Kansas City and St. Louis and those cable markets into the SEC. Texas A&M brought Houston and San Antonio, and I guess Dallas too, to a certain extent. Easy to understand why the SEC would want those teams. But we're kind of in a post-cable bundle world. I still have cable, but we're kind of in a post-cable bundle world for the most part. That thinking about conference expansion from the standpoint of, hey, which markets does it bring into my league? I don't know that's quite as cut and dry as it once was. In some form or fashion, even though the streaming wars and which streamers are going to survive and which streamers are going to thrive, that's still a little bit undetermined. The sort of streaming style of content where, where you watch matters less than the total number of eyeballs that are watching, in some form or fashion, that probably shapes the next round of conference expansion. It's not, market size and market location as much as it is just sort of total eyeballs wherever they come from. So kind of a long answer to a short question. Darian Ford says, how about USC, UCLA, and the Arizona, Utah, BYU become the South Conference, and then the Washington, Oregon, they all become kind of the North League. Yeah, I mean, for those of us who kind of like some sort of geographic idea around college athletics, that may be the biggest sacrifice of all here coming up. Buddy Lee Z says, what's your take on having possibly two shutdown corners on the field together in the future? A.J. Harris and Ellis Robinson. Yeah, buddy, it's a really fun thing to consider, especially in the case of Ellis Robinson, who I don't think he has gotten his proper consideration by Georgia fans as of yet about how dominant a recruit he appears to be right now. I mean, this is a guy that you don't care about the ESPN recruiting rankings necessarily in comparison to the other recruiting rankings that are out there. But Robinson is their number one recruit. I mean, Robinson's as elite of a prospect as Georgia's brought in. And what the future can be with him is, I think, potentially very, very bright. Very, very bright. So A.J. Harris, a lot to like about him for sure. But in the case of Robinson, this is going to count as one of the most touted prospects Georgia's ever brought in. And I don't know that he's been discussed enough in that term. Paul Moon says he's been to Seattle before. I've always heard that Seattle for like the UW games is actually a really fun place to be. You kind of got is it the Puget Sound? Is that the name of the water thing there? They have kind of like their own version of the Tennessee Navy with the boats and stuff like that. Plus you got like Mount Rainier and stuff like that in the background. So supposedly it's a really pretty place. And, they care more about college football than you might think. Washington has some fans. They're pretty typically like a top 20 recruiting program, things like that. That's probably a better program than we give it credit for. Richard D. says, I've been watching your show since 2017. I love the chortles, the special guests, the discussions. My favorite show was the inception of the Golden Shoe and the corresponding closed caption video laughing at Florida players and fans. Yeah, Richard, that's awesome to hear. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. South GA Dog says, as I sat at Universal Studios last week, I had people giving me weird looks. I was pumping my fist, smiling and laughing. They thought I was crazy. What they didn't know was I was in the middle of the Universal Studios. I was getting the live version of my DawgNation Daily fix. Oh, that's awesome, South GA. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And kind of nice to know I could go with you on a trip like that. That's a really cool thing. Thank you very much. I just really appreciate that. Thank you. Morris Rich, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. He says I should have brought my family in for the celebration. So today we are actually having an open house for my daughter's school, my son's school. So I think they would have maybe come in, but there's kind of a lot going on around our families. We're getting back to school here today, unfortunately. So, and actually my son was a little bit mad because I think he did get to come in for the 1000th show, and but he also got a chance to get out of school for that. So I think he was a little bit upset. But I guess today he got the whole back to school thing kind of going on. PDT says, who were your first guests ever? One of the first guests in the first show, I was thinking about this the other day, is a guy named Chris Kirshner, who actually I think covers the New York Yankees now. It's kind of funny to think. Back then, he was working for DawgNation as a recruiting reporter. Yeah, so he was among I was just thinking about that the other day. He was on our first show ever, and now he's not even covering college football anymore, which is kind of funny. A lot of that stuff kind of changes. Let's see what else. Dogs in Elville, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate that. John Beecham, appreciate that. Thank you very much, John. Thank you so much. Jacob Yarborough, going back to when we were back in Miami with the floral print shirt on. Yeah, that's kind of my like when I'm not at work. A lot of times you kind of find me wearing like the sort of festive, tropical type gear because when you're in Miami, you want to look like Miami, I guess, but also take a decent number of cruises, things like that. Let's see what else. Randy Hall. Tell me a list of folks are now in the DawgNation DawgHouse. Yeah, that's pretty funny. All right, it's kind of late. We're going to take another trip around the comment section. Good stuff here. Nature Gator says, do the 2000 shows include SEC Country? No, they do not. That's a totally separate show, totally separate thing. We've done, if you count all the shows together from various, like the weekly stuff around DawgNation, that's a lot more. But the 2000 is DawgNation Daily episodes alone. DawgNation Daily episodes alone. We've done 250 a year or so for because we really don't miss shows. In fact, I think there've only been a small handful of days that we've ever missed. I think I finally had a sick day last year, right? It's like I finally had a day I could not do the show. I got the flu last year. The weird thing about me is I never get sick. Don't ever get sick. So in 8 years, I didn't have a sick day. I think, didn't I miss a show like one Friday back this year in February or sometime like that? January, February, something like that. I had never had a sick day prior to that, ever. And never will again, hopefully. And then there was like one day when this is kind of like now we could do the show from home if we absolutely had to. But one time it snowed. Producers couldn't get here. So we ended up not having a show that day. That's actually a long time ago, too. That's probably 2017 when that happened. There've only been a couple of days over the course of this 8 years that we've missed and not had a show. Now, if it's Christmas Day, we don't typically do a show. But yeah, that's how you get to 2,000. You do about 250. I guess you do 250 a year for eight years. I guess that's. I'm not very good at math, but I just sort of figured that out. That's how you get to 2,000. 250 a year for 8 years, and you'll get there. Texas Dog, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Always good to see you. Zebulon Owen, good to see you there as well. For sure. Really, really, really good stuff. Scott Green, great to see you. Thank you very much. So fun to see so many people who've been a big part of these 2,000. And I told this to John Stinchcomb yesterday. The most fun part about all this is the great collection of Georgia fans we had a chance to meet. That is always a really cool and fun and very special thing. So to all of you who've made the 2000 happen, thank you very much. Let me get a couple more Facebooks. Philip Jordan Wells also going back to the pandemic time of 2000 when I grew the beard, or I should say the pandemic time of 2020 when I grew the beard in. Yeah, that was kind of a fun time for sure. Daniel Aldridge, thanks a lot. I appreciate that. Matt Rukavine also thinking back to that sort of throwback time there as well. I've also got a sort of a home studio I've been kind of working on. It's been under construction now for quite some time. We may, because if that was to ever happen again, which God knows, hopefully it doesn't, we would have a better home setup now than we used to. The home studio has been under construction for a long time, though, unfortunately. Zach Adams says in 4 years we'll be at 3,000 episodes and have a handful of national championships by then, which I love. Miriam Corbin says I've done the show in the cold, the rain, the wind, inside, outside, side of the road, inside a moving car, lawn mowers, blowers. Yeah, we've had a lot of stuff, Miriam. You are right about that indeed. We have had all kinds of things over the course of time, for sure there on that. PDT says, we want to see the inside of that cake, and you enjoy it. You deserve it. Well, I certainly appreciate that. Yeah, we'll look forward to doing that. Okay, here comes the knife, which is the first time I've ever been entrusted with a knife here. I don't know if this is a good idea or not. Look at this. Kaylee Manziel's also got. See, this is the most important gift of all. Some of y'all know that I absolutely love the Dr. Pepper. This has been true for a long time. This is actually now a real sponsor. So Kaylee's got the Dr. Pepper for me here today as a way of celebrating the 2000. And if we're talking about 2,000 episodes of DawgNation Daily, then that's probably at least 6,000 of these probably consumed over the course of that time. So that is really good stuff indeed. All right, so I'll cut the cake here, and we'll see if we can do all that. There you go. Cutting into the cake. Boy, how good does that look? Really good there. Look at that. How about that? Doesn't that look good? This is a nice chocolate cake. Can you believe all this? I'm not going to let y'all see me eat this on camera. But that's the real deal cake right there. Actually, I'll take a bite of it. We'll say goodbye to you all. By the way, y'all check out RS Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. We certainly appreciate them. Here's a bite of cake on the way out the door. Very good. There you go, everybody. Hey, we'll see you tomorrow, episode 2001. A lot of fun. Boy, that's delicious. It's fantastic cake. All over my fingers, all over my hands. Celebrating 2000. Really fun stuff. Thanks to RS Andrews. Y'all have a great, great day. We'll see you back here again tomorrow.